For more about the National Carbon Emission Trading System, we are joined in Washington, D.C. Changhua, who is the China-Asia Director from the Office of Jeremy Rifkin and former Greater China Director of the Climate Group. Also, we have in London, Isabel Hilton, CEO and editor of ChinaDialogue.net. I want to welcome both of you ladies to this discussion. I want to start with you, Ms. Wu. How much will China make a difference in terms of the carbon trading mechanism? We understand in some of the other countries, actually the difference it makes is quite marginal.
China's newly launched carbon market, carbon trading market, definitely will add a new leisure to the push and pull of the policy landscape that's going to drive the low carbon transformation. As we all know, China has made a serious commitment to the Paris Accord by 2030 to peak its emission around that time. In the meantime, set 60 to 65% of carbon efficiency, carbon reduction per unit GDP over 2005 level. In order to deliver that, China has to adopt more seriously and more aggressively policy tools and instruments in order to deliver those sort of goals. And the carbon market happens to be one of them. By saying that as a carbon market, carbon trading is not the only tool, but it's one of them. Just imagining, when you have a tools mechanism like that, it definitely provides more incentives for companies, industries in particular, to invest more in innovation, to find alternative, to improve energy efficiency, of course dramatically to reduce emissions. Only by doing so, companies will be able to have more competitive advantage, reduce the cost, and also become more competitive from the market perspective.
I would love to imagine so, as you just suggested, but according to the experiences elsewhere, for example, in the European so-called carbon trading system, we haven't seen much result, in fact, that it would make a huge difference in terms of the reduction of carbon within a big area. Ms. Hilton, what would you say about that temporary result, at least?
I think it's absolutely right that the performance of the European Union trading system has been consistently disappointing, and there have been a number of problems with it from the start. One is about the allocation of permits. Too many were given out. You know, when you set up something like that, industry lobbies, companies lobby, they all want generous allowances. So in order to get everyone on board, there is a tendency amongst policymakers and indeed amongst national governments to give too much to their industries. So next time round you auction them and so on. However, in all of this process, and it's been going a number of years now, the carbon price has never got to the point where it is, you know, a serious incentive to become more efficient. So the current EU carbon price is about $8 a ton. It's estimated that US analysts have said what we need is $45 a ton. The same is true in China. If you look at the average price across the pilot systems, carbon was trading at between 30 and 60 renminbi a ton, and you probably need about 200 to 300 renminbi a ton. So the art of it, the way of making it effective, is somehow to get the price to the point where it incentivizes companies really to become more efficient and to close down
I want to bring
emitting.
that point to Ms. Wu to respond about that. Will China be able to do it? But even with that, how much will it be achieved is still a big question mark in terms of the eventual huge goal.
Well, the EU ETS experience is a good reference for China to learn in the beginning. I think one critical factor, as just pointed out by Isabel, is that the balance between supply and demand. You do not want to supply too many carbon credits on the market that no one is needed. That's end up say, yes, you have a market, but actually there is no price and a meaningful price at all. So that's going to be the biggest lesson China has to learn from the EU ETS experience. So this is from the beginning by designing such a mechanism, so China has a chance to succeed. But of course, as I said, a chance to succeed doesn't mean we definitely will succeed. And the government and the industry have to work very, very close together to design such a mechanism in order to make sure the supply and the demand will work well with each other.
Yes, indeed, Ms. Wu. That's why I want to follow up about that. We remember very well, China was at the very beginning pretty much committed to the carbon trading system. But it did take a while for the country eventually to come up with a specific plan, publicize that plan, and get also the public consent about that. So does that mean, Ms. Wu, according to your inside information, that China has already gone through some of the thinking process about the issues that we just mentioned? And in the plan, there are specific things that would deal with some of the side effects or not efficient approaches as in some other parts of the world, that China would do a better job. Do we see any signs of that?
Well, let me put things in perspective.
Well, I certainly hope.
Yes, China
Ms. Wu,
said,
let's go to Ms. Wu first, and then I'll go to you, Ms. Hilton.
So, I want to put some clarity
I was
up
just
front
going
here. China launched the national carbon market. But actually, we're just beginning focus on the electricity power generation sector. So China is not launching an economy-wide carbon trading platform yet, right? We started with the electricity market. Why we started with this one particular sector? Because the data, transparency, the infrastructure, if you look at even the metering equipment, actually, power sector in China happens to be probably the most ready sort of sector for carbon trading. And that is why, in order to overcome a lot of barriers, challenges, in reality, that many of them probably cannot be sort of overcome overnight. The Chinese decision makers decided to start with the power generation sector first, using that sector, the most ready sector for carbon trading, to build up the infrastructure, set up the registration, make sure the monitoring MRV system will be in place, the reporting, the clearance, whatever. So that's a sort of a very conservative scenario we're witnessing now. China is rolling out. So hopefully through that learning process, China will take step by step to get to where we want to see, meaning carbon market, the trading can really play a very important role in terms of pricing of carbon. By saying that, as I said, carbon trading is only one of the policy tools. In order to set a really good price on carbon, you need other tools, for instance, carbon tax, among others. But this one, now we're talking about trading, is important in a way, and we all hope that's going to succeed in order to play its role.
Ms. Hilton, what would you make about the fact that China started from the coal power plant, from the natural gas power plant? Some would say this is the most difficult areas to work on, but others say this is probably one of the best areas that you could have some achievements to work on. So what do you make about that fact?
Well, I think it is probably more straightforward to start with power plants. I mean, you know where they are, you know what they emit. Setting up a scheme like this is a long and complicated business because, first of all, you need really good data, for any scheme to work. And I think that a lot of the process that we've seen over these last few years in China has been about getting better data systems, making sure that the data has integrity, because otherwise it just doesn't work. I think China would eventually benefit from extending it to other sectors, so aluminium, steel, concrete, where China has surplus capacity in any event and needs to close some of that down. And the other, I guess, finally, there are moves, certainly the UK has set a floor price for carbon. It's still not high enough, but it's $24 a ton. The difficulty of doing it in a kind of, as one country, means that you put your, they argue competitive disadvantage, but within China, within the power sector, that could be done, and that, I think, would speed things up. But this is one of a whole series of policies that are required really to make a transition. And I think that we've seen in the last few weeks some of the results of hasty or uncoordinated transition from coal to gas, for example. So it is a very complicated business.
It is. And it is even becoming more complicated if you look at the global picture. The Chinese carbon market will be the world's biggest, that we all know, about 1.5 times as large as that of the European Union, which is the second largest in the world, and 10 times bigger than California's, which is one of those states in the United States which wants to volunteer to have a carbon trading mechanism, which is the biggest in North America. But the question is, how much will this make a difference? Even though China could achieve its goal, we understand, Ms. Hilton, the United States withdrawal from the climate change accord, and also different countries have their different blueprint, and whether they will be able to implement these blueprints is still unknown. Not to mention the qualities of the different blueprints for different countries when it comes to how to reduce carbon. So we know this is about global issue. If China work hard on this, if the European countries work hard on this, but this is still not going to solve the problem. So are we going to eventually empty-handed, even though we tried a lot? Ms. Hilton.
Oh dear. Well, certainly, you know, the current targets of Paris do not get us to where we need to be. You know, they get us to 3 or 4 degrees of warming, and at that point, you're really, really in a crisis. So, even with the best scenarios, there is a gap, and there is some discussion currently about how that gap can be closed. And it is likely that we will see more and more discussion about carbon removal or different forms of geoengineering, a highly controversial territory. So, you know, everyone really has to, you know, set the maximum targets they can and work together. In terms of carbon trading systems, you know, there has been talk about linking these systems up. I think we're a long way off that, and I think I would rather see effort going into demand reduction. You know, for example, in China, a rural household uses 45% more fuel to heat it than an urban household, and that tells you that rural houses are inefficient. To insulate those houses would make an enormous difference in demand and in emissions. So there is actually a whole raft of policies that are available, but they need, you know, they need to work together.
Okay. Well, Ms. Wu, things are complicated. We know that, but we didn't know that things would change so fast. I mean, listen to what Ms. Hilton just said. China committed, but, you know, it might not work anymore because you've got other problems and because others are not committed anymore. So, Ms. Wu, China made the effort, but is it going to be worthwhile? Of course, you would argue, yes, it's going to be good for China's own environment, but as we all know, the environment is just not within national border. It is much bigger than that. So without global commitment, is this going to work?
I think, well, this is a good question. A good question in the way that I think this is the question, the global question everyone is coming together trying to address. You know, addressing carbon issues, addressing CO2 emissions is not just for the sake of China, it's for the global. And we literally, humanity lives in the climate change era, and we are all suffering through that process. So China, as the world's largest emitter, and also as the world's largest developing country and the emerging economy, China has to shoulder the responsibility, the level of responsibility that China has to take on in order to contribute to the solution to the global climate change challenge, which is regarded as the most demanding challenge actually for humanity in this century. So we have to figure out. Secondly, as you said it correctly, even to the Paris Agreement, all the countries are putting their voluntary sort of actions on the table. Experts have already add them up, basically saying, wait a second, we cannot possibly deliver the goal we set in the Paris Accord to address this 1.2 degrees or 2 degrees increase. But it's a sort of a good starting point. At least we have some consensus, agreement, or commitment on the table, and we have to constantly lift up that level of action. Thirdly, carbon trading China is rolling out now is a good sort of highlights. Bright spot added to that landscape, because in order to speed up the low carbon transformation, we need a lot of tools, instruments to speed up the solution. And China is taking that sort of step today in order to say, okay, I'm going to also deploy the market-based instruments, carbon trading, in order to drive faster the transformation. So yes, answer your question is that we don't know, whether humanity will together address this challenge or not. But in the meantime, we cannot just give it up. For the sake of future generation, countries need to come together and trying to figure out how to address that.
We've been hearing that for quite a long time, I have to say, Ms. Wu. Every climate change conference that we went to together, probably some of those slogans have been used repeatedly. But the question is, Ms. Hilton, at this point, United States the National Security Strategy, which was just published, has already eradicated climate change as a national security threat officially. So, not to mention the earlier so-called verbal withdrawal from the climate change accord. So, having said that, though, how will the others still be able to rally for this cause? Could be a big question mark. Because when one goes selfish, it's very likely the others to follow suit.
Yes, but you know, it is absolutely true and lamentable that President Trump has taken this route. But the great thing about the United States is that they have elections every 4 years, so he's not going to be there forever. And if you look at what's happening below the federal level, if you look at what's happening in states and cities and businesses, you know, there is a tremendous resistance to this, and we shouldn't think that the United States is President Trump and President Trump is the United States. In fact, US emissions are coming down. There are endless entities below the federal level that have pledged to meet the Paris Accord. What we will miss is the United States' capacity to mobilize others, and it gives, as you say, a little cover to those that are going selfish. But the other encouraging things that have happened this year, and China's played a big part in this, you know, the price of renewables has come down to par with coal, for example, in lots and lots of places, and that's China's ability to manufacture. So that new developing economies, such as India, can maybe skip a lot of the high carbon stage and go straight to renewables, and that's a tremendous contribution. You see more and more investment moving out of coal because it regards it as a stranded asset. There's a tremendous kind of public opinion swell against high carbon investments. So actually this year, you know, we talk about how quickly things are changing. I have a sense that things are really changing now because the money's moving, the technology is moving, and the politics mostly remain pretty committed.
We should all remain optimistic. That is the point that we are trying to get across to our audience today. But at the same time, we need to be very calm in terms of what the goals are and whether we're doing enough, all of us, in terms of achieving those goals. Thank you so much for the two of you ladies for being with us. Isabel Hilton, Changhua, thank you so much for being with us.